How about a magic trick?
Man is by nature a social animal whose inclination it is to live in the company of others. These are famous views of Aristotle's, and that there's something in us that compels us to live in society.
A fairly simple thing happens to work. Because that's all you ever hear about in this country is our differences. That's all the media and the politicians are ever talking about, the things that separate us, things that make us different from one another. That's the way the ruling class operates in any society. They try to divide the rest of the people. They keep the lower and the middle classes fighting with each other so that they can run off with all the money.
I thought, my joke.
You know, anything different, that's what they're going to talk about. Race, religion, ethnic and national background, jobs, income, education, social status, sexuality, anything you can do, keep us fighting with each other so that they can keep going to the bank.
All you care about is money.
You know how I describe the economic and social classes in this country? The upper class keeps all of the money, pays none of the taxes. The middle class pays all of the taxes, does all of the work. The poor are there just to scare the shit out of the middle class.
The right kind of life also calls upon us to make the right kind of choices. Not only must we act in the course of life, but we also have to have good reasons for it. We have to have good reasons in the sense that our actions have to be something other than merely reactions. We are of several natures: passionate, rational, willful. The task of virtue is in getting the blend right and seeing to it that the ordinance of reason is dispository. It controls and regulates everything else, and the passions central. The virtues are invariably the midpoint between two extremes. The virtue is the midpoint between an extreme deficiency and an extreme excess. It's always promoting the reason.
This is the instrument of your liberation.
The harmonic, the mathematically pure. The goal is getting it right.
The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates said that over 2,000 years ago.
Now, Socrates understood that the first step in knowledge is to define words.
And I agree.
And he understood that people so frequently act on the basis of what they think they know without ever pursuing.
I would just add,
Now, what this gives us, then, is a philosophical psychology. At once, if it's skeptical about perception and sensation, then, of course, it must also be skeptical about experience itself. What is experience except an accumulation of perceptions?
the unexamined life is not worth living, man.
So, in fact, wisdom is not going to come simply from having lots of experiences, and wisdom is not going to come even from the voiced, shared experiences of the many.
That hits me here. But when you do examine life, can you go too far?
That is, if it's a nation of fools, finding out what 51% of them want isn't very helpful.
How much is too much, man?
What is this?
That's the question I had to ask myself.
So you can't count on majorities, you can't count on the enumeration of opinions as these show
Because in
up.
examining my life, I got carried away. You see, some people are passionate about money, or power, or cats.
Only me.
While I like 3 of those
Oh,
things,
do you?
my passion is for something less tangible.
What you're looking for is the person who actually gets it right, the one who does understand what the nature of the human condition is and what's right for it. What you need then is a philosopher king.
Thank you, good doctor.
You need someone who by nature and as a result of philosophical guidance has attained a degree of wisdom otherwise unavailable to the masses.
Now, here we have two sides to Socrates.
This
On the one hand, this is a man on trial for his life, Socrates, who stops and instead of focusing on his own trial and defense, is trying to help this man understand that he doesn't know, that he is taking the gravest of actions based on thinking he is wise when he is not wise.
I love figuring things out. The process of exploring a possibility to discover something new, that's my passion.
Oh, you think darkness is your ally?
That's a simple pleasure I've enjoyed since I was a kid. But recently, things got complicated. That's what I want to talk about tonight. This is a story about what happens when one man's obsessive analytical mind goes too far and turns on itself. My story starts with one little word, if, and one medium-sized person, I. If I, the statement. If implying possibility. I implying... Because you see, it's in the if that I seem to have lost and then rediscovered the I. To put it another way, I figured if. But what does that word mean? Where does one find meaning in
Going back to the Platonic tradition in antiquity, the implication for ethics is that in order to find our rightful place in the chain of being, we need only realize fully our own nature. Some have suggested it frees us to wander about happily, using our gifts as best we see fit.
Okay, let's look up the word. If has 5 meanings. Let's start at the beginning. If meaning in the event that. When I was a child, if I was uncomfortable or insecure, I would escape into my mind. You see, I believe that every person has a lens through which they see the world. Each of us in this room has a unique lens. And that lens determines the meaning of everything you encounter. People, places, experiences, even simple objects.
And therefore, the way that we interface reality through the prism of our language, our thinking, our preconceptions, our stereotypes, our culture, which is to say we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are, which speaks exactly and directly to what I think McKenna was saying. Reality is made of language.
Socrates first answered that he had been preparing his whole life to defend himself, but then said something more mysterious and significant. When he attempted specifically to consider strategies that would produce acquittal by fair means or foul, or even when merely considering his potential actions at the trial, he found himself interrupted by his divine sign, his internal spirit, voice, or demon. Socrates discussed this voice at the trial itself.
You know,
He said
I don't want there to be any hard feelings between us.
that one of the factors distinguishing him from other men was his absolute willingness to listen to its warnings, to stop speaking and cease acting when it objected. Socrates' decision to accept his fate allowed him to put away mortal terror in the face of death itself. He saw that his life had been so rich and full that he could let it go gracefully. He came to understand all that was happening to him as a gift from the gods. He was not therefore required to defend himself against his accusers, at least not with the aim of pronouncing his innocence and escaping his fate. Instead, he turned the tables, addressing his judges in a manner that makes the reader understand precisely why the town council wanted this man dead. Then he took his poison like a man. Socrates rejected expediency and the necessity for manipulation that accompanied it. He chose instead, under the direst of conditions, to maintain his pursuit of the meaningful and the true. 2,500 years later, we remember his decision and take comfort from it.
And Xenophon and Plato, by the words of their apology, would hand down through history this condemnation of the Athenian democracy, which had put to death the best man of its age. I am going to die. What is bad? My whole life has been a preparation for death, preparing myself so that my soul will be free. And the whole life of a philosopher, the search for wisdom, is the preparation for death, because wisdom is the understanding of absolute truths. And the soul that has prepared itself will be united with God. And that is what I wait for. Who had fearlessly spoken out for truth and whose whole life was a living witness to the search for wisdom. The greatest of all the Athenians, Socrates, passing his legacy down.
Goodbye.
Babe, wait. Babe, wait. Babe, wait. Babe! Babe, wait! Babe! 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 Babe, wait! Babe, no! Babe, no!